Okay, so it is the top of the hour and we can get started. So welcome everyone to Inclusive Product Week. And you are in the Pitching Accessibility Consumer, so sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Pitching Accessibility to Internal Teams and Management session. So welcome. And today we have Kat Richards speaking. And so Kat Richards provides a well-rounded strategies and educated recommendations through qualitative and quantitative data as a consumer experience CX manager at an advertising agency. Wow, that's amazing. With 9 years experience, she has specialized in improving experiences through validated learnings with users, as well as aligning agreement with stakeholders. And understanding that accessibility is a huge part of inclusive design, she advocates and integrates accessibility as part of digital processes with her teams. And last but not least, Kat thrives in finding clarity in chaos. Amazing. And communicating effectively to others, utilizing her skills with a lean UX environment. Sorry, Siri yelled at me. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Kat, so she will be screen sharing. Excellent. Okay, take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Can you guys all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. We're going to talk about how to get buy-in for accessibility work and really understanding your audiences to really help you make that pitch. So here's a quick outline for what you can expect today. But before we start going into the different ways that we can talk about this, I'd love to know who's in the audience, and if you can either respond via a poll or just within the chat here, what your role is, as well as how often you do accessibility work. This will give me a little bit more context to understand who I'm talking to.
Okay, your poll is up, so you should be able to see it in Hoffman.
Looks like there's still some people trickling in, so I'm gonna just keep moving along, if that's okay with everyone. So just a little bit of background about who I am. I'm Kat Richards. I'm the Consumer Experience Manager at Hoffman York. We are an integrated advertising agency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as my introduction kind of already covered a lot of this already, I do have 9 years of experience in visual design, UX, and consumer experiences across agencies, in-house, as well as digital startups. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a huge D&I advocate, and of course, an accessibility advocate. I do also want to note that I am by no means an expert, and I'm still also learning in the accessibility arena, and there's still so much to learn and dive into. So I just want to start there. And really, as part of COVID, one thing that was kind of a blessing in disguise was that I had a lot more opportunities and time to really explore and learn about accessibility work and inclusive work. So there is one link that I want to share as a resource if anyone is looking for opportunities to dive even further. Whoops. Sorry about that. Hold on one second. Sorry, guys. This is my first time using Hopin, so there's some technical issues here. There it is. So why are we here? I want to start by saying that building accessible and inclusive solutions is really part of our responsibilities as designers, as writers, as project manager, whatever our role is. It's really, all of our jobs, and you'll hear this a little bit more later in my presentation as well. But I'm going to take a wild guess that if you're here today and also tomorrow, you already know this. However, not everyone understands that accessibility is not as easy as a click of a button. So how can we do more accessible work when there's really not a lot of understanding on what it means to do accessibility, or even buy-in internally with your teammates, with senior management, or even with clients? So today I'm going to share with you some of the talking points that I've had when pitching the value of accessibility and doing accessibility work, so you can also bring that to your companies. So it really comes down to three key things here when understanding why accessibility work is important. The first one is that it's a numbers game. There are 61 million disabled individuals alone in the US. That's 20% of the population, or 1 in 3 households. When we look at this globally, we're talking about $8 trillion in buying power. That's a huge market of audience that we're currently ignoring. The second thing to consider is that it's a business sense, right? We're building good business report and really building quality solutions and products that works for everybody. And we're not really exposing the business or clients in an agency perspective to potential lawsuits. And then the third thing is, of course, because I have a UX background, perhaps the most important one in my perspective is empathy, making sure that you're building solutions that works for all users and not just the bigger population. So these three factors are going to come up again throughout the presentation, and really understanding that each one of these will matter, but we'll have to dial up certain ones depending on who our audience is, and really making sure that we really drive this home. Again, really understanding the audience and which ones to pinpoint more. So I know that we all come from different company structures and different cultures. But for today, I'm speaking more from an agency perspective. And so I will be covering these three audience groups, starting with the senior leaders and then going into the internal teams and then ending with clients. And these are in a sequence for a reason. You can't really successfully pitch to clients unless you can have that internal buy-in and unless you have the right processes to really learn and to execute the accessibility work in-house. So we'll start with the senior leaders. So the three things that really work with this group and what I've learned in the past when pitching accessibility work is really using data and numbers, really selling the ROI of accessible solutions. Now, that's not to say that we can't use the two other key points like empathy or, it's the right thing to do with this group. But what I've learned is using data really resonates a lot more with this audience group. And so the 3 points here that I want to point out for senior management or leaders is that it makes business sense, it's a numbers game, and of course, accessibility work really makes your company unique and different if your competitors aren't doing that. So when we talk about avoiding lawsuits, in 2020 alone, there has been 3,550 cases of website accessibility lawsuits that were filed against companies. That's 10 lawsuits every day. We saw a 23% increase from 2019 to 2020, and it will continue to grow if we follow this trend. Now, when I talk about making business sense, what I mean by that is, seeing how it covers all the different industries. And we saw a bigger trend, especially in the retail and food spaces because of COVID, which makes a lot of sense. But the past lawsuits, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this as well, but past lawsuit examples, Target actually lost over $6 million and $3.7 million in addition to that, just in legal fees alone for not having a site that's accessible for blind users. Wells Fargo also lost for a similar reason. They lost $16 million. And then the most recent was Domino's. So that's still ongoing, but what we heard is that the Supreme Court's decision is to side with the consumer, which, foreshadows a lot on what's coming for the rest of the businesses. So all of this really to say, even though you're not in the majority of the population right now within the retail or even the food service industry, it doesn't mean that your business is immune to lawsuits and being sued for not meeting accessibility standards. It just means that you're getting targeted later. When we talk about numbers, according to the Census Bureau, 19.9 million have difficulty lifting or grasping a mouse or a keyboard usage. 15.2 million have cognitive, mental, or emotional impairment. 8.1 million have a vision impairment, and 7.6 million have hearing impairment. That's in the US alone. That's a huge percentage of users that we're not meeting the needs of or completely disregarding. And on top of that, something that I mentioned earlier is that if your company is one of the few that can do accessibility work and can do it well, that really helps overall the business and makes your business stand out from competitors. So pivoting then into the internal teams, what does that look like? How do you build the case for your teammates and the people that you work with? One thing that I want to call out here is explaining that disability covers a wide variety, and it really could really be permanent, temporary, or situational circumstances. And all of those things will impact your solution. But really the most impactful way that I found to really sell the value of accessibility work with your teammates is using empathy. And I'll get more into that details in a little bit. And then the last thing here is also considering time efficiencies. So when I talk to internal teammates about why we do accessibility work, I always start with a slide like this. Accessibility work doesn't mean that your site's going to look really boring or that it's text only. And it's also really helpful for us to show websites that are accessible too, so that your teammates can understand what's possible and what could it look like or what could it function like. A big part of really selling the value of accessibility work to your team is really understanding that disabilities is not black and white or one or the other. It's really a spectrum. And so Microsoft's Inclusive Design Kit, which is what I screenshotted here, really does a great job breaking that down. So one example that they use is you could permanently be deaf, you could temporarily have an ear infection, or situationally, you could be at a bar, which overall impacts your hearing abilities. And really getting the team to understand that when we create a solution that is inclusive of all of these situations, it really allows us to cover a broader audience. And one of the things that I also like to call out here when trying to tell the teams this is why we do this is that it's really the right thing to do. All of the users that are coming to our sites, coming to our solutions or products, they should have access to digital solutions, whether that's healthcare, banking, or retail. Another way to really push that empathy with your team is, of course, to test with users who have disabilities whenever that's possible, and then really sharing those video highlights with your team. Because just being able to see your team observe for themselves, a video really speaks a lot louder than doing any presentation or any pitches that you can give. Now, I understand that that's not always possible, so if that isn't possible, something else that I've tried doing too is an immersion exercise or a simulation workshop, essentially. And I know that there are, lots of controversy about that. There's a lot of pros and cons about why we do those things. And so making sure that you're really setting the stage up correctly is really important if you do decide to run a simulation workshop. Always caveat with your teammates that it's not really intended for you to understand what life is like living with a disability. But the goal of the workshop is to provide them with a glimpse of how to complete a task with a disability using our solution. And so what I've done in the past is, similar to running usability testing where we would have a persona and we would have usability task questions, and the persona is created from data and research. So what we're doing here is adding another layer on top of that. So we're providing a disability backstory, and we used a plugin called Funkify, and the link is also in the deck here. And what that plugin actually does is it adds a layer of a disability that has additional severity that you can kind of use on a scale to really apply it on top of your digital solution. And so here is a photo example of one that we did for a government site that we worked on. You can see that there's a little note card with a scenario, and we had that setting for that laptop was a blurred vision simulation. And so everything that was on top of our website solution had a blurry filter on top of that. And so then the user at that station had to go through and complete a task of, finding a certain item on the website with the blurry vision. And the last point for the internal teams to remember is understanding that retrofitting accessibility efforts into an existing solution or into an existing project is never going to be as seamless as doing it right the first time. There is actually a DEC case study from last year noting that 67% of accessibility issues actually originate from design phase. And then we continue to add on to that through accessibility debt as we continue in the project process to development or even testing. So we really have to think about accessibility here in the same light as UX or SEO efforts. And really understanding that accessibility is not just a one-time task or a checkbox, right? But it's really an investment in your project or in your website. So we kind of talked about this already, understanding that different audiences have different motivations and what drives them. And the biggest educating moment that I had with the teams was really explaining accessibility is not one person's job, that we all play a role in the overall accessibility of the project. And so here's kind of how I broke out those roles. For client service and project management, it's really about time efficiency and avoiding lawsuits for our clients. For UX designers, visual designers, UI designers, it's really relying on that empathy so that they can see the overall impact of their work. And for developers and QA, it's building usable components and making sure that we're accounting for the different situations or using different technology to really test and make sure that we met the accessibility standards. So starting with client service and project management, and this deck is available after this presentation as well, so you can kind of see specific tools that would work for the different roles. But for them, it's understanding that accessibility is time efficiency for them, for their team, for their clients. And so for client service folks and project management folks, their role is to really make sure that there's enough time for the rest of the team to go through accessibility training, to understand and integrate this as a project process moving forward so that they can really see the impact of it overall. From a UX perspective, their role is to really build that empathy and to understand the frustrations from people with disabilities using our solution. And so that can be done through testing with individuals that are disabled, or as I mentioned earlier, using simulation exercises to really build that empathy and going through the actual workshops. For content writers, their role is to really write simply and to provide consistency. So making sure that there's content hierarchy and of course SEO that includes both on-page and technical are in place, and making sure that we're not just talking about web or product content, but also social media content. For design teams, their role is to really understand how to communicate to our users. And so things like not relying on color alone or mouse interactions alone to communicate something, making sure that there's enough color contrast, and then of course, avoiding any flashy interactions. For our development team, their role is to make sure that the code is in logical flow, and there are definitely a lot of tools here that we can really verify the existing code, whether it's live or not, to verify the improvements and areas that could be tweaked. And then, of course, making sure that we understand when to use ARIA and why. And then lastly, we have QA, making sure that they are working with the UX team to really use automated tools, but then, of course, also manually testing this. So as a QA individual or a QA team, their role is really to figure out the different ways to test, whether it's through color contrast tools, keyboard accessibility, as well as assistive technology like screen readers. And then, of course, if they don't have the capabilities to do that, they can always also partner with an accessibility expert that can kind of guide them through ways to test or even provide them with an accessibility audit. So once you've had these conversations with the first two groups, the senior management and leaders, and then also your internal team, the last part is really selling the value to your clients. And for this group, it really boils down to making sure that you sell the initial two groups first, because that's how you build those allies to really help you sell to the clients, which is kind of the goal here, right? The second thing to think about is making sure that we're communicating to clients that it's better for business, it's better for their business. And then of course, making sure that customers understand brands, and for our business to say that, you know, businesses are customer centric, but then our solutions don't reflect that, that says a lot. So again, there's power in numbers, right? Using the fact that you have your senior management or senior leadership and then your internal teams to really help support you and to help convince your clients and pitch the value of accessibility work. This is where, again, in an agency aspect, your client service team or even your project management team is really your biggest allies here. Explaining to the clients that accessible solutions is really going to help their business not only be better as a brand, but also avoid lawsuits. It covers a huge demographic as well, as we've already discussed, to make sure that they're really expanding their solutions across broader audiences. And of course, we kind of talked about this already, but saying that your company is user-centric when it comes to solution is one thing, right? But showing it with action is another. Data actually shows that 34% of consumers considered a brand's commitment to diversity and inclusion when making a purchase decision. And 67% of consumers are more likely to make a second purchase knowing that brand is inclusive. So here's the unfortunate thing, right? So pitching accessibility work and inclusive work to clients, what I've learned is that clients typically fall into three groups. The first one is that they care about accessibility work because they're being targeted, because they're being sued. And so they want actions coming out of that. The second group is that they truly care about building inclusive solutions because it's the right thing to do. And then lastly, we have clients who understand where we're coming from, even after this pitch, even after data, but they just don't have the budget for it, or their priorities are different. And at the end of the day, all we can do is really show them the value of why we need to build with accessibility in mind, and really show them, you know, this is the benefits of it for your business, for your consumers, for people using your products. And it's still going to be up to the clients to really decide what they want to do. And something that I've, you know, heard throughout pitching to clients and talking about accessibility work, you'll hear a lot of rebuttals and misconceptions. And so I kind of want to walk through some of those and, you know, talk about how we can address some of them. So the first one is we're not a government entity or a website, so we don't have to make this accessible. Government entities really only cover 508 compliance. So, and we know that more and more regulations are coming, especially for digital experiences. We can look at ADA or WCAG for guidance to really start on what does the initial steps look like. But our goal here is really to be more proactive than reactive. Another commentary that I get a lot when we're talking about accessibility work is that it's going to cost us more money that we'll never make back. And as I've said before, just like UX work or even SEO work, accessibility work is iterative, it's ongoing. It's not a checkbox that you just do one time and then you're done. And of course, if we didn't do it right the first time, it's going to cost clients more as we continue to ignore the accessibility debt that we're building over time. I also have heard this before where people say, you know, our clients will say, people with disabilities don't come to my site. Well, we just learned that 61 million in the US alone is somewhere on the disability spectrum. We also know that WCAG or WCAG 2.2 will be released this fall, and then Silver, which is 3.0, will also come out before 2023, which means that there's a lot more regulations coming, a lot more specifics on what people are expecting now in digital experiences. So we know that we're losing a percentage of customers, and we're actually creating barriers for them. And the standards are just getting stricter and stricter as time goes on. So we're really just building more accessibility debt as we continue to disregard and ignore building inclusive solutions. And these two are kind of my favorite because we hear them quite often. So this one is, we check our website using an automated tool. This should be enough. Unfortunately, automated tools only cover 20 to 30% of errors. And in addition to automated testing, we always recommend, with our clients and even internally, that we should always run manual testing as well. And of course, testing with accessibility professionals or even individuals with disabilities, so that we can really see how accessible is our solution or is our product, and what does the iterative steps look like to improve. And then the last one here is that there are tools out there that will promise, a quick fix for all your accessibility issues. And if any of my developer friends are here, you know that a quick fix with code anytime is never a reality. So one thing to think about when you see solutions like that is that they're all very surface level, and they're all very much overlays, which actually causes more problems than the original solution that you pushed out. And we can dive deeper into this to really understand why those overlays don't work. But there's two URLs on this deck here that kind of really talks through why they don't work and the areas that people really overlook. Just for more reference, when we talk about overlay widgets, they're still getting sued, even though they claim it solved all the accessibility issues. More than 250 of the lawsuits from this past year alone were because of these solutions that were supposed to solve everything. So at the end of the day, our goal isn't to make the entire site AAA standard and have everything perfect, right? It's really to make things as accessible as we can without compromising the business goals or the aesthetics of the site. And really focusing on the idea that accessibility work is iterative and it's ongoing and it's a process. So putting this all together, I want you to take away from this presentation today is that understanding your audiences is really important, because understanding what motivates them will help you figure out how to communicate to them and how to sell the value of accessibility work. And then of course, again, really just driving this home here, accessibility work is ongoing and it's a process. It's ongoing education for you, ongoing education for your team, it's ongoing with selling the value of accessibility work. So while accessibility work and building inclusive solutions isn't as easy as a click of a button, we do have to approach this with a very agile mindset, really thinking that it's going to be iterative, knowing that it's going to take time, know that you will run into barriers, and you might even fail the first time. And that's okay, because no one really starts a first skill or a new skill at a very high level, expert level. Give yourself some grace and really focus on doing the small steps through quick wins. And then that's how you build that buy-in internally with senior management, and then of course with clients. By educating the internal team the value of accessibility work, and really slowly trickling it into your process for the projects moving forward, so that it's really no longer added work, but it's just how we do things. So I'll leave you with one final thought. Sherry is another speaker at this conference, and she said something that really resonated with me. Good accessibility work is about compliance. Great accessibility work is about empathy. We all have the power and we all have the responsibility and the power to remove barriers and really empower all of our users to be productive and connected. So let's get to work. You can find me on LinkedIn or email here if you have questions or you want to reach out. And then of course, if you're looking for an agency to help consult or even pitch accessibility work, we are happy to help at Hoffman York. Thank you. Are there any questions?
There are a handful of questions.
Okay.
So yes, thank you so much, Kat, for speaking. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing presentation. So yeah, we will go through some Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature in Hoffman or the chat. I've also been watching the chat. Okay, cool. So let's go through some questions. Great talk, Kat. How can we follow you online? And you shared out your social media. Do you want to mention anything else?
I am pushing myself to be a better writer. So I'm definitely talking about accessibility and even UX work and CX work on Medium. Let me put that link on here really quickly. Any other questions?
Okay. So yes, how do you break the ice about accessibility debt with teams who are already resource constrained?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny that people think about accessibility as an add-on on top of the already tech debt that you have, right? But when we think about it in a longer term of a project, if we didn't build something right the first time, there's always going to be debt moving forward, right? So it's really thinking about how do we plan a project and incrementally add some of the accessibility work back into your sprints if you follow true agile or whatever your process is, and start building towards that positive number versus staying in the negative in the accessibility debt.
Yes, I love that incremental process. It can seem a lot less overbearing if you take it
Absolutely.
one step at a time. Great, great, great. Okay, next question. Once you get buy-in from the team to invest in accessibility, what methods do you use to measure success?
What measure? Well, it depends on what your goal is, right? Is your goal to reach WCAG AA in terms of standards? Are you trying to reach a specific audience and you're kind of prioritizing your backlog of accessibility efforts that you're making? It's hard to answer that question on how do we measure success without defining what success looks like.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like there's a variety of methods and that we can custom pick and choose different metrics that suits our needs. Okay, excellent. So Delia asks, where can I read about accessibility standards? We want your recommendation.
Absolutely. There's so many great resources. W3C is definitely one. WCAG is another one. WebAIM is also another one. There's honestly so many, and Microsoft, Google, they all have a lot of great resources. Again, depending on if you're in a specific role, if you're a developer, if you're a product owner, if you're a designer, that kind of they call out areas that you can really focus on to help build a more inclusive and accessible solution.
Fabulous. So let me see if I missed anyone else's questions. Okay. Oh, excellent. Delia, comment back. Okay. Well, with that, if there are no other questions, then we can wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.